Hello once again. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers here on The Verdict. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And this is sort of a follow-up show to a show we did just a few months ago.
Yes, it is. When Larry Hellman was on a couple of weeks ago, or a month or so ago, as you say, he was talking about the Justice Commission, Oklahoma Justice Commission, and the commission that's looking into what can be done to eliminate or diminish wrongful convictions of Oklahomans who were charged with crimes and who in fact were not guilty but were convicted. Today we're going to talk about the report of the Justice Commission that tells us what we can do. The report is out. We're going to have the Honorable Drew Edmondson and Police Chief Bill Citty join us and talk about that commission report and tell us about the recommendations that the commission is putting forth that may bring about a diminution in the number of wrongful convictions in Oklahoma.
Yeah, advances in science is allowing us to correct some misdeeds, but the better question is, how did those mistakes occur to begin with?
That's right.
That's kind of where this picks up. We'll be back on The Verdict.
Well, prices at the pump are hitting new highs this week. In other news,
gasoline is expected to top $4 a gallon this week.
expect drivers seeing sticker shock at the pump.
OPEC has raised the price of oil again, and Wall Street worries.
Well, a full tank of gas is going to set drivers back.
Straight ahead, the latest news on
Meanwhile, gasoline is expected
My great-great-grandfather, Cyrus Harris, came to Oklahoma Territory, the Trail of Tears, and he served as the first governor of the Chickasaw Nation. I'm Harris Penner, and I own and operate Penner Ranch in Oak Creek, Oklahoma, and I'm Chickasaw. As far as the ranch in Cyrus Harris, my daughters will be the 5th generation on that land. They're the backbone, like the Chickasaw women have always been. They're the backbone of the place. It's been in the family all of my life, all of my grandfathers. My grandfather and my dad were both born on houses on that place. Today, the ranch is a cow-calf operation. The land, it means everything to us. We would never get rid of it. That's our roots, our heritage is right there. As far as Chickasaw heritage, I'm proud to be a Chickasaw, proud to be an Oklahoman.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guests.
On my left, we want to welcome back to the set of The Verdict for his 11th appearance, the Honorable Drew Edmondson, the former Oklahoma Attorney General. He did his law work at the University of Tulsa, was a member of the Oklahoma House of Representatives, served with distinction as District Attorney in Muskogee County for a number of terms, served 20 years as Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma.
It just felt like 20. It was 16.
16. I did that last time you were on. Of course, it's been 4 years, so I guess that's why we did that. You have had many high-profile civil and criminal cases. Still, he's now with the very prestigious law firm of Gable Gottwals in Tulsa and in Oklahoma City. And he was appointed chairman of the Oklahoma Justice Commission, and the Oklahoma Justice Commission has just issued his report. Drew, welcome back.
Thank you. Great to be here.
On my right is Bill Citty, the police chief of the city of Oklahoma City. He did his undergraduate work at Oklahoma State University. He graduated from the FBI Academy. He became Oklahoma City Police Chief about 10 years ago and has been with the department for over 30 years. He is also a member of the Oklahoma Justice Commission. Chief, welcome back.
Thank you.
Glad to have you for your second appearance.
Second appearance, right.
Drew, we had you on earlier to kind of talk about the formation of this, but remind viewers why this committee, why this report was even necessary. What were we talking about at the beginning?
Well, what we have faced nationally and also here in the state of Oklahoma with the expanded use of DNA. We've gone back on the cases where people were convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms or some even on death row, and re-examined the evidence, including DNA analysis, and have found out that they were factually, actually innocent of the crime for which they'd been committed. Now, people have had convictions reversed for other reasons, legal technicalities, but these were people that, according to the evidence, they didn't do the crime. And so the question rose, what happened in those cases? Now, how could we convict someone who is actually innocent of the crime for which they were convicted? And we were tasked with the responsibility of reviewing cases, analyzing them, trying to figure out where the errors were and what we might do to the criminal justice system to keep that from happening in the future.
If not the individual names, what were you looking for when you put together the committee?
We were looking for factors. We were surprised on these cases that were reversed with forensic evidence, how many of them involved apparently positive eyewitness identifications, how many of them involved confessions that proved to be false, how many of them involved what we refer to as jailhouse snitches or informants who came in and said that the defendant confessed to them in the jail cell, and it turned out that wasn't true, that he hadn't committed the offense. And so we're trying to determine what procedures might weed out these errors in the system as it goes forward.
Bill, we're going to get to some of the findings of the commission report here in just a couple of minutes, but what was the single most surprising thing to you in your service on the commission of these various areas that you looked at? What surprised you the most?
Well, I mean, most of the issues didn't surprise me considerably, but what probably surprised me the most, because you had defense attorneys, you had prosecutors, you had judges, you had law enforcement. It just ran the gamut of people in different professions within the justice system. And believe me, the judges were just as hard on some of the things that judges need to change, prosecutors on prosecutors. What amazed me is it wasn't just about one single issue or problem. Everybody across the board was very fair and somewhat, obviously looking at the issues, was very fair and looking at their own area of responsibility in the judicial system, and did a lot of criticism of themselves as well as other entities like law enforcement. So it was a great discussion. It probably surprised me the most that everybody was so open-minded and really interested not only like in law enforcement but also in the judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys across the board that had a role to play in making this a better system. So that probably surprised me the most.
Well, let's jump in there. There were 5 major components of this report, and one of them had to do with false confessions.
Yes.
On the police side, I think that's where a lot of those false confessions probably occurred.
Well, that's where it starts. The confessions start with law enforcement. So, I mean, we make the first contact, and if a person's going to confess, it's going to be to a law enforcement officer or to an investigator. And of course, law enforcement is always looking for ways to make things better. I've never found a law enforcement officer that wants to convict the wrong person. But confessions are very, very, they can be very, very complicated, depending on what the crime is, depending on the defendant, the level of education of the defendant. In some cases, there's a lot of multiple factors, and the commission itself looked at those factors and basically is making recommendations how to make those interrogations and those confessions much better or be able to withstand much better scrutiny when it does go to trial.
Well, most of us have never been in that situation or even witnessed one, but we see television, we see the movies, and there's the bright light, and there's the young person who's sweating, and the interrogation is immense, and they're pushed and pushed and pushed, and finally they're not allowed to get a drink of water or go home unless they confess. Is all that stuff accurate? Is that the type of stuff that was looked at here, or is that just Hollywood?
Well, a lot of that's Hollywood, and I've never seen too many confessions where defendants are browbeaten and they're not allowed to go to the restroom. But again, those are the types of things and some of the things that were discussed. Because some interrogations, for example, when I was an investigator, some of the interrogations and interviews would go on for as long as 16 hours. Is that too long? Maybe it is too long. It depends on the circumstances. But the recommendations and things that need to be made is how do you treat that possible suspect under those circumstances. You make sure that they have, adequate food. You make sure that, they're not really browbeaten. You make sure that if it gets too long and they're too tired, you may take a break and start it the next day. And of course, one of the biggest factors is really requiring, the recommendation commission has made, is to require law enforcement agencies to videotape those so that they can be scrutinized better. A jury can look at it and see if an interrogator went too far, whether an officer went too far, and so that they can make up their own opinion based on what they see in that video as to whether or not any abuse occurred and whether or not that confession is legitimate.
Well, Drew, when you looked at these, when there were false confessions, why did the person confess? Is there any insight here?
There are a variety of reasons. In the old days, you might have had what Chief Citty was referring to. In a 16-hour interview, it is not unusual if the person is confessing to a series of crimes. If he starts confessing in hour one, and then he said, "Did I tell you about that thing over on 37th Street?" And he said, "Well, tell me about that." And it can go on for a long period of time if he has quite a criminal history. Some people just want to please. They think they know what the officer wants to hear, and so they're going to give it to him. Some people are not mentally strong enough to stick with the facts and stick with the truth, and if they think the officer wants to hear a confession, they'll give him a confession. Some of them confess because they think if they don't, they're going to get a death penalty. If they confess, they might get life. If they don't confess, they might get a death penalty, when in fact they didn't do it. One of the big things that we were very interested in is protecting the officer from the allegations that defense attorneys often hear about mistreatment, abuse, lies, that details of the crime were given to them by the officer. They didn't really come up with that. And having it on videotape just ices that down where everybody knows exactly what happened.
Chief, what about eyewitness identifications?
Well, eyewitness identification, I know, is probably one of the areas that I know in my career has probably concerned me more than anything, because in many cases under stressful situations, I mean, you've got an individual and you've got a victim that has a gun to their heads. That's a stressful situation. And to be under those types of circumstances and to be able to identify a person maybe you have never seen before and that maybe you only saw for a matter of 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and ask them to make that identification, and having that victim wanting to help make that identification, wanting to help solve the crime, puts a lot of pressure on. There's things that the commission has recommended to put in place to make the possibility of having a false identification, less likely. In most cases, it will not reduce the numbers of identifications. If the right things are done, it probably will reduce it some, because you do not want a victim, to identify a person just because they think it's the right person. And we've recommended things to put in place and how those can be conducted by law enforcement that would give you really much better identification by that victim. Let's
get us to a break. Okay. Oklahoma City Police Chief Bill Citty and Drew Edmondson here, giving us a report on a lengthy effort by everyone from the governor on down to try and see how we can make our criminal justice system a little more responsible. So we'll get back right after this.
They lift, grip, and bear pressure. They carry our state through every season. Hands that simply by doing their job, forge opportunity for nearly 350,000. These are the hands of Oklahoma's oil and natural gas industry, working sun up to sundown for our economy, our future, for every person who lives where these flags wave.
When you have something important to communicate, it becomes clear that there's a lot of competition for your audience's attention. So how can your message stand out and actually resonate with your audience? Legal Graphics has the answers. The team at Legal Graphics will work with you to plan, design, and even test your presentation to ensure your message will be heard and remembered. Call Legal Graphics today to schedule an appointment. The readiness is all.
Welcome back to the set of the verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, Drew Edmondson, and Oklahoma City Police Chief Bill Citty. During the break, you were explaining to me how the format of a police lineup has changed throughout your career.
That's correct. I mean, normally the old ways we used to do lineups is basically you show 8 pictures, find pictures that are similar to the possible suspect, and show them all at once. Well, all the studies that have been done have said that the better ways of doing that, for one, is to not have the actual investigator doing the lineup, so that the investigator isn't influencing the selection based on either things he says, or maybe even a facial expression that the victim could pick up, pointing to this one, and he gets a, oh, that's, So what it is now that they're recommending is basically doing it sequentially and putting pictures in separate envelopes, and that an independent investigator that's not involved in the investigation actually conduct the lineup, the photo lineup with the victim, and that they would go through the envelopes individually, pull out the pictures and look at them, and that investigator that's actually doing that has no idea who that suspect really is. So it just makes it a little bit more and takes out that argument that that investigator influenced that selection in any way.
Drew, you had many years as a prosecutor. What was your personal experience or your impressions about false confessions or false eyewitness identifications?
Well, you tend to believe your eyewitnesses if they are firm in what they say, that in their degree of certainty is strong. You absolutely tend to believe them. Confessions, I want to hear them. We didn't videotape in Muskogee very often, but we audio taped, and I wanted to listen and hear the questions and hear the answers, make sure that facts weren't suggested to the defendant, to the suspect during the interrogation. But I want to echo what Chief Citty said a while ago. The last people that want to convict an innocent man are law enforcement. If you put an innocent man in jail, number one, there's a travesty of justice. Number two, there's a guilty guy out there on the street committing more crimes. And nobody in law enforcement wants to see that happen. So we want to be very careful in our investigations and prosecutions to make sure we got the right guy.
Okay. What about forensic evidence?
Forensics evidence has improved dramatically and is continuing to improve. What they can do with DNA today and tomorrow is greater than what they could do in 2005 or 2000 or 1995. It takes much smaller samples to get a good DNA result than it used to. One of the things that we stress in our report is that for all areas of forensic investigation, that it be done by accredited certified laboratories, and that the technicians who are doing it are also in accredited labs and are certified to do the work that they're doing, to make sure that we have the expertise. Everything from the initial investigation at the crime scene to the analysis of the evidence in the laboratory, to make sure that it's top-notch, number one.
What about changes in the law or procedure insofar as misconduct is concerned, competency of counsel and the like?
We've made recommendations, when a court finds that there's been incompetent counsel provided, that's a violation of the code of conduct for lawyers.
Yep.
You're not supposed to provide counsel in an area where you're not competent to do so, and we're recommending that that be reported by the judicial authority that finds it, or the DA or the Attorney General, that those reports be submitted to the bar. We've recommended that both for prosecutors and for defense attorneys, when there's been egregious misconduct by a prosecutor, that it be reported. And we've also recommended training for judges. There are 3 legal components in that courtroom. And particularly if you're talking about a first-degree murder case, they all 3 need to be top-notch. They need to have the best resources that they can have, because you're literally dealing with an individual's life.
What about jury instructions? Is there a problem there, or is that something you found is probably doing okay?
Most of them are doing okay. We've recommended some changes on eyewitness identification. We want to be sure to stress in our jury instruction the factors that can play, the length of time someone has to observe, cross-racial identifications, the lighting, the presence of a firearm. All of those things can impact on the accuracy of an eyewitness identification. They need to be stressed in the jury instructions.
Bill, what about jailhouse informant testimony? Is that something that is often a problem? I mean, is the reliability of jailhouse informant testimony really suspect?
Well, it always has been. I mean, it always goes to the motive of the person that's in jail, and that's always been scrutinized highly, probably more highly than most other informants or information that you may get in an investigation, because you have a person that's incarcerated, and the first questions that's asked is, what's been promised to you?
Yeah.
What have you been promised something to get out of jail? Everybody wants to get out of jail. Are you making things up so that you can get out of jail? That's always been scrutinized quite a bit, and I know that the recommendations, there are some recommendations on jury instructions so that maybe the jury can maybe take that into consideration a little bit more than they have in the past.
There's also a recommendation that if there has been a promise or a deal or at least a feeling that the state will be more lenient, that be revealed to the defense well in advance of the trial.
We just got about a minute left. Did you find that smaller and perhaps less sophisticated law enforcement agencies had more problems with this than larger police forces and jurisdictions?
Well, you know, most of the crimes are in the larger jurisdictions, so it kind of evens out. What we stressed in terms of videotaping and having double-blind lineups and things like that your very small municipalities tend to call in the OSBI or the sheriff's office anyway. You know, I don't want to name particular towns, but there are some law enforcement agencies that should not be working crime scenes, and they don't. They know that. And if they get the very rare murder that happens in a particular county, they will call in the OSBI.
Okay. And is this report available to the public?
www.okbar.com. It's available to either read or download.
Drew Edmondson, Bill Citty, thanks for coming on The Verdict.
And thanks for your service on the commission.
Thank you very
Ken,
much.
I'll have a final word after this.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
I think for us, once we got started and we began to see the tremendous need just within our state, it really was just a calling for us. The blessings far outweigh any obstacles that we've faced.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of the verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of the verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Want to thank our guests, Drew Edmondson and Bill Citty, for coming back on the show.
Yeah, these fellas have a lot to do otherwise than come on and visit with us, but to give this information out to our viewers about the substantial work they did, of course on a volunteer basis, and the recommendations that fine commission made, I think is really valuable. We hope you enjoyed hearing about it.
Refreshing to know that they're trying to get it right.
Yes. And they've got the people on the commission that know how to make the recommendations that will allow us to do those things better.
It's never going to be perfect, but
No.
it can certainly get better, and they're working to make sure it does get better. We have a couple of websites I want to pass along to you. First of all, you can get the complete report by this committee at okbar.org. That's okbar.org. And we have a website too, where we'd love for you to go on there and talk about a guest that you'd like to see on an upcoming edition of The Verdict. And we take the email and the feedback that we get from our viewers very, very seriously. In fact, a lot of our shows are based on your input.
Well, indeed, we get comments that sometimes make us puff up with pride and other times make us wither in shame, but we appreciate them all nevertheless, and I hope you'll keep them coming because we do pay attention to them.
Absolutely. Again, our website, theverdict.tv. Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We will see you next week on another edition of The Verdict.